If you're empty, if you're struggling, if you're frustrated, if you're anxious, most of the time you're not in alignment with anything that's important to you or anyone that's important to you. To me, I think most people that are struggling or empty haven't identified something bigger than themselves, so they think they can solve it. The first problem is thinking that you're the only one that can solve it is a really big issue. It all goes back to that structure and that discipline. And it's a framework for success that everybody likes to ignore. You can't pick and choose when you want to be disciplined. You'll be fat if that's your way of life when it comes to diet. I'm going to pick and choose when I want to be disciplined about my diet. Guess what? I'll be fat. I'll be out of shape. I'll be unable to perform. I'll be less than I could be. But if I stay disciplined to some extent and I simply am imperfect, I'll have moments where I just go, I could have done better. Does that make sense?
I love that. Your mom, I totally get it. It makes me feel very emotional as well for you.
Because you're starting to see it.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I have a question about that, and I've got other things I want to talk about before we get to our videos. Is at what point in someone's life, just now I want to get back to your experiences with people, people call you for mentoring all the time, you see all kinds of people. At what point does the discipline need to kick in? What happens to somebody where they're just they're eating Cheetos all day and then, they are spending all their money and blah, 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 and they're like a train wreck. And they recognize it. I think a lot of people recognize that they need discipline. They recognize it. They know. But at what point have you seen in your experience where that kicks in and is successful? Is it rock bottom?
No, I think sometimes it's just direction. I think coaching is the difference. So, it's like meeting a kid on the street that has a great jump shot, right? But they've never had organized sports. We actually went to a game last night in Suffolk, and Great Bridge has a really good team, and the Suffolk team is not very good, and it's very raw, but there's a freshman, little, small kid who played goalie who really played well. And he has no experience. It's his first year playing, and you can watch the way that he's raw. He just needs a little direction. I think most people just need a support system. And so I go back to the 4 quadrants and the life quadrants, right? If you just think, to me, I think most people that are struggling or empty haven't identified something bigger than themselves, so they think they can solve it. The first problem is thinking that you're the only one that can solve it is a really big issue, because if you haven't solved to this point, what makes you think you're just going to change right now? The second thing is how are you showing up? And when you look at the energy portion, it's a healthy mind, body, and spirit. And so aligning them, many of us have parts of our lives where those are in good spots in different times. Maybe your mind's spinning and racing because you're too busy, but you're really focused on working out and you feel really good, but everything else in your life feels like in disarray. And but grounding yourself in some capacity is a very important thing. It's about finding the core to the best version of yourself, how you show up, and something bigger than yourself. Then it goes to the next steps, the next levels. And that is, who are you around? Are you around people that stuff your face with Cheetos every day? Are you around people that just say, screw it, I'm going to die anyway, who cares? Or I'm 25, I can eat whatever I want. Okay, great. I could spend whatever I want. I take every penny, every bonus, every extra dollar they get, they just blow it, and they love sharing on Facebook and social media and Instagram and TikTok and everything about how much they have. And what we really know is they don't have shit. And that's why they're showing it. So who are you surrounding yourself with? Are they people that are making you better? Are they people that are coaching you? Are they people that are giving you the parameters? Sometimes the discipline needed to have the impact you want in your own life or the impact you want to the world comes from just getting your stuff in order. It's not the discipline to act. It's actually just organizing your thoughts enough to say, why is this important? What is important about this? How do I want to show up? Is this the kind of person I want to be, and why? Why is it bigger than me? Who am I helping? These are just, they're all instances to me that help shape and organize. I think sometimes discipline is created into this one act. Like I have to act, and this is the discipline it takes to act. And that's a part of it. But a big part of it is just organizing. Most people never take the time to organize their thoughts, their goals, their dreams, and how are they aligned to their daily actions. They're not. If you're empty, if you're struggling, if you're frustrated, if you're anxious, most of the time you're not in alignment with anything that's important to you or anyone that's important to you. One of the biggest things that I see in high school kids, in college kids, are the moment where they start to separate and they start to just take on this persona that as a parent, you know, and this is less personal experience because my boys haven't really done this, but from seeing a lot of other kids, they start to take on a persona that isn't them. It's never been them. Now, it might be them in the future, and it's not my job to shape what they want to become, but most of the time they feel empty and their head's down and they're uncomfortable and they're drinking a lot and they're smoking a lot of weed and they're doing a bunch of stuff to help fill their lives with something. And what they're lacking is the true north or the direction of who they want to be. And what they're actually doing is the opposite of what they think everyone else wants them to be. So they're just fighting something instead of actually leaning into what they want. And that's a challenge. And I think organizing that and really thinking about it, why am I wearing these ugly ass clothes? I mean, I wore them. I did the same thing. Big ass baggy jeans and ugly outfits. I'm embarrassed to look at what it looked like back then. It was popular. It was edgy. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was empty. Why? Because I hadn't organized the direction I was trying to go. I was just trying to grab at stuff, hoping that something would just lead me in the right direction when the very things I needed was an organizational structure to life.
I want to dig into more on that organization part, because there's a couple things you've said today that we've never talked about, which I think is really interesting. I mean, we talked about it maybe off camera, but let's talk about the organization first. How did you do it, right? So, what does it look like? Is it like you sat down one day, you like put all your thoughts on paper? Like, what does that mean? And I know when we've talked about organizing finances, you've talked about like closing bank accounts and like, you know, consolidating.
Yeah, inventory, right? Consolidation.
Okay. So I want to hear from your perspective, like what is that organization? Because you haven't always been like this. I mean, people who know you now, different guy 20 years ago, right? What does organizing your thoughts look like for you?
I think the first thing is you have to take it from here, what I think, what I know, what I want, to paper, to something that's written down, something that's documented, something that is accountable. And so one of the first things is I always had a vision of who and what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, what it might look like, but anytime it's an idea, it can be reshaped over and over and over again, but it's not concrete until you put it down on paper. It's like building a dream home in your brain versus building a dream home with architecture. Like if I'm really serious, I have to get architectural drawings, I have to get engineering, I have to actually pay for the plans with time and money, and that's where the investment comes in, right? But I took it from my brain to a plan. And I think one of the things that started to change for me is I started to write stuff down. One of the earliest coaches I worked with 5 years or so into business said, you know, what do you want out of life? What are the things you see that you really want? And I started to write down stuff that I wanted. Like it started with the simplest, embarrassing things I would not even like say are important to me today, but it started out with, I want a house big enough for my kids to have their own room. I don't want to feel like we're on top of each other. I want to live in a good school district. I want to make sure my kids can have a better experience than other kids. I want to be able to send them to Catholic school. I want to be able to pay for their college if I need to. I'd love to have a swimming pool. I remember my friends that had pools, like how much other kids gravitated to their house during the summer, and they became the hub. And I wanted to have a house with a pool where we became a place where everybody wanted to be. I wanted a place big enough for my family to have big celebrations, whether it be the first birthday party for my nephew or my brother's gender reveal party for his kid. Like the very things that sometimes frustrate me today, because I'm like, why does everybody want to be at our house, are the very things I was dreaming about when I first started writing down things. And what happened was I wrote down goals at work. I wrote down impact things that mattered to me. I wrote down goals in my marriage. I wrote down stuff that I wanted, the kind of, I didn't want like a fancy vehicle, but I wanted a new vehicle, and I said I want to have a new truck or a new something. I was vague, but I created a vision and I put it down on paper. What is crazy is I had folded it up and I wrote all these things out and I folded it up and I put it away and I put it in a book. And like 5 years later, I pulled it out and I had like a 5-year goal, and every single thing I wrote down had come true. Like in some variation, every aspect of what I wrote 5 years earlier was true. And this is pre this business. So I lent that book out many times. I took my folded paper out. I cannot find that folded paper at all. I know that it's somewhere. I'll find it one day when I need to find it. But you and I have had this discussion about the fact that I went through this exercise just now. I started this business in 2016 with Freedom Street Partners, and I wrote down prior to ever starting the business what I wanted to achieve. And almost every single aspect of that has come true, and then some. And so, to answer your question, most people stop in the brain. They may not even take it from the brain to the voice to tell their friends and family things that are important to them. But if you could take it from the brain to the voice to the paper and then back to the voice again to share it with people, you have now made it specific and measurable, and you're accountable and all the things that smart goals tend to be. But you've done it internally, and it just subjectively, it kind of becomes this thing that happens, and you can just you could just let it happen. You're already doing the right things most of the time. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the change. If you want to know the change was when I started this formula. The formula started with brain dumping. It just started with too many things on my brain and too many ideas. And as I wrote them down, I started to realize that some of them were bullshit, and I didn't actually believe it. I didn't actually want it. I didn't actually think it was that important, so I could cross it out. Other things I was like, wow, that is so important to me. It's almost like also coming up with a core value system for yourself. When I was young, I didn't have that. But I have no problem telling my sons, this is not the kind of family we are. This is not the kind of name our name symbolizes. Some of the things that I've done in my life are not things that represent our name well, but I'd love for you to not have to repeat those mistakes. And you do those things, you say those things, but you're identifying a core sense of values. And why? Because I've run successful businesses now. Now I understand that you can't run a successful business if you don't establish core values, if you don't establish a mission of where you want to go, if you don't have a vision into the future, if you don't build a culture. Well, how do you do that in a family? You got to have a culture. You have to have a vision. You have to have goals and objectives. So every year every new year I made my sons, so I don't make them do a whole lot of anything because they would hate what I stand for if I did. But I do make them every year kind of establish a couple of goals that are important to them for the year, and I have them write them down. And my youngest son he took the project when he was like 6 or 7 years old, and he put a cross with regular tape on his wall, and he wrote the things that were most important to him and what his goals were. And some of them were like, I want to play professional soccer. I want to be a good student. They were basic, but they were also, some were wide, some were tight, some were short term, some were long term, and they're written in green marker, all on this white tape that you could barely even read on the wall. And when I would ask my son, did you rewrite your goals? He would say, my goals are written right there on the wall, Dad. And I'd say, well, what's changed? He'd read them to me, and they would literally be the same goals. Once you establish, and watching the discipline that he's utilized and the success that he's had in what he's done shows me that this recipe is not just for businesses. It's for humans. It's for people. It's for children. It can be used for anybody. But it's identifying and organizing our thoughts, consolidating them, prioritizing the right parts of them, finding the core values and the mission statements, and then developing and building it from there. It's one thing, okay, I want to stand for integrity. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I just take it here, or do I take it to the world? You know, do I want to actually be a doer or just an idea person? That's another thing. A lot of people want to be idea people. They want to tell the company what they should be doing differently. And then when you say, would you like to lead that? Well, that's not me. I'm not a doer. I'm an idea person. That's a great idea. You know who would be good at that? Somebody else. And we've all been that. We've all done that. We've all been on a board where we tell them all the things that are wrong. And I've also been on a board where I'm like, is this the kind of board where all we're going to do is give ideas and none of you are ever going to do a damn thing? Because this is the most annoying thing in the world, because most of you will cycle off this board and never ever make a difference, except you shared your ideas that you never helped execute. So the same thing goes for us. Are we idea people with our lives, or are we actually doers?